Good morning. So I was watching the SpaceX and NASA launch on Saturday, and aside from all the awesomeness of exploring space and starting space missions and all that, I noticed something else. I noticed that the UIs are getting a lot more modern and a lot better, even in those very specialized devices like spacecraft. I think that the UI revolution is well underway, and it's really awesome to be a part of it. So a photo has been floating around the internet showing the interior of the Dragon spacecraft, the Space Shuttle and Apollo, and on the first glance it kind of looks like, there's just a lot less complexity the further we go in time. And that is partially true because the new spacecraft can do all the same stuff the other one could. But the main difference is that basically going out from hardware interfaces, like purely hardware, like all those knobs and switches everywhere, and you need to remember the proper sequence, unless you want to die. And we're moving towards like a touchscreen interface that can display whatever you want at the specific moment, and it doesn't really clutter the space with all the other things that you're not using at the moment, and that is great. But let's step back for a while. The first Macintosh, 1984, and that was a revolution. It was partially borrowed from Xerox and their innovation labs, but you can't really take that away. Before the Macintosh, all the user interfaces were mostly text-based, and people still did office work in them. They had spreadsheets, they had word processors, but they were just text-based, so you had to use the keyboard for pretty much everything, and you needed to know all the keyboard shortcuts and all the different combinations to accomplish what you really wanted to do. And moving into a desktop environment, a visual environment which you can basically interact with using your mouse, using a pointing device, was really a game changer, and it kind of redefined computing from then on. So just as with Space Shuttle and Apollo, old computers were mostly hardware interfaces. The screen wasn't really that interactive. It only displayed the information, but everything that you were doing was actually done on the keyboard. So basically right here. And this part here was just to kind of show you what you're doing, so it was mostly informational. Of course, there was also the click wheel as the interface, but it was a very single-use device, and I'm not gonna count it into the progress as much because it's not really present anymore. It was done for just the iPods and it served them well, but you couldn't really imagine a phone using the click wheel, even though Steve Jobs joked about it at the first iPhone presentation.
And here it is.
But the next big thing was actually the touchscreen. And of course touchscreens existed for a while now, but in 2007, when the first iPhone was introduced, the way you interact with the touchscreen and all the user experience connected to it transformed radically how we're using the devices. And it actually influenced a lot of other things like cars and computers and refrigerators and everything in the household, because everything now has some form of a touchscreen. Even the camera I'm recording on right now has a touchscreen right there, and I can use that touchscreen to change some settings. So pretty much everything now is touch-based. And during that first iPhone presentation, Steve Jobs said exactly that.
Why do we need a revolutionary user interface? I mean, here's 4 smartphones, right? Motorola Q, the BlackBerry, Palm Treo, Nokia E62, the usual suspects. And what's wrong with their user interfaces? Well, the problem with them is really sort of in the bottom 40 there. It's this stuff right here. They all have these keyboards that are there whether you need them or not to be there. And they all have these control buttons that are fixed in plastic and are the same for every application. Well, every application wants a slightly different user interface, a slightly optimized set of buttons just for it. And what happens if you think of a great idea 6 months from now? You can't run around and add a button to these things, they're already shipped.
So touchscreens and adaptive interfaces redefined how we're using pretty much everything right now. And this is awesome, and this is actually our time to shine, because we as UI designers and UX designers can provide people with the right interface for the right job, and we can build that interface in a beautiful, user-friendly way. So it's not gonna be as difficult as remember the proper switch combination in the ceiling and then doing something here, you know, and you need to be completely correct. You just touch a couple buttons and you accomplish the exact same thing. But obviously some of the industries weren't really as happy about it, and one of those industries was cars. Because cars for a very long time, even though they started adding screens, they mostly weren't touch screens, they were mostly for navigation. And they had a lot of knobs and buttons and switches and everything. And of course the reason for that is that while you're driving, you don't really want to look at the touchscreen and interact with it and, you know, kill somebody. So physical switches and buttons actually serve the function that you can actually feel them with your finger without taking your eyes off the road. That has been also changing a little bit right now because the cars are getting smarter, so they can actually keep you in the lane. They can alert you when you're gonna hit something, and they can actually slow down before you do it. So you have a little bit more time for reaction right now, and you can interact with a touchscreen. And what's even better, people are so used to interacting with touchscreens right now that they can actually just by memory, you know, swipe the temperature in the car without really looking at it because they kind of remember where it is. So it's a little bit similar. It doesn't have the tactile feedback of a physical button, but maybe at some point it will. Maybe actually the screens will kind of morph into like sort of extruded shapes, kind of like neumorphism, but in real life. And that would be pretty awesome as well. But before that happens, we're stuck with the flat screens. There's plenty of stuff to design. And the most striking example of this new approach of moving away from countless switches and buttons that you don't really need is the Tesla Model 3. Because it only has the touchscreen and the very basic primary controls on the steering wheel, which is all the stuff that you actually need to drive the car, and all the secondary things are on the touchscreen. And what's great about this approach is the fact that you can come back 6 months later and add a new feature, or as in the case of Tesla, you can add some pranks, Easter eggs, video games if you're bored waiting for somebody in the car, or anything else like extending the range by some software optimization. So you can actually modify the car and add new things to it because the interface is not fixed in plastic. So I was super happy to see that the new Dragon spacecraft actually is mostly touchscreens, because the astronauts have a lot of responsibility on their hands already and they have to think about a lot of things all the time. So simplifying the sort of kind of stupid approaches of, you know, knobs and switches everywhere into a touchscreen will allow them to use that brain power for better things, basically. And of course there are some redundancies. There are probably some hidden switches if the touchscreen fails somehow or anything else happens like that. But that simplicity is amazing, and seeing those two astronauts in the Dragon on Saturday, I was just blown away by how futuristic it all looks. Like we are living in the future right now, and UI actually is shaping that future, because that interface on those big touchscreens in the spacecraft is a sign of the future, because it doesn't really look, you know, that retro old school. Well, some people like it, but still it looks like something out of a sci-fi movie. And it's really exciting because it actually shows that there's a lot of use cases that can still benefit from great UIs. So there's a lot of UI work still to be done and explored. And maybe the technology will one day allow us to actually have extruding touchscreens with like semi-physical controls, but changing. And I don't really think that voice is the right way for most appliances, the voice interaction. Of course, voice is important, but you're not gonna really talk to your car and tell it to turn left while you're driving it. It's still better to actually use the steering wheel. So only like simple commands like make the temperature lower or higher or things like that will probably go into voice at some point. But there still would have to be a physical control, because for some people just talking to a machine is not really that straightforward, it's not really that easy. And it's a little awkward, especially in social situations. because like when you're around people and you're talking to a device, it kind of looks very weird. So I don't really think that touch interfaces are going away anytime soon. They're gonna be supplemented by voice and maybe neural link at some point as well, but they're not gonna be completely replaced by it. So yeah, there's a lot of work to do, a lot of awesome interfaces to build, and I'm really happy for that. Well, anyway, thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, click the like button and share the video on social media because it's gonna help me grow this channel into something that I'm planning for it to be.